ended the last video by saying that Apple management decided to introduce the iPhone on June 20th at a price point of $600. But very soon after the launch, Apple quickly reduced the price to $400, which was in fact the rational price which management had arrived at in the first place when they did their first analysis. Then we asked, why did Apple do that? Why did they introduce the iPhone at $600 and shortly afterwards reduce it to $400? What do you think? Well, based on using the combined approaches of neoclassical economics and behavioral economics in their pricing decision, Apple's decision to make the price $600 went something like the following. First, Apple management questioned all the assumptions they were making. For example, that people know how to value a revolutionary new product. Second, Apple management designed different pricing experiments to test their ideas. Third, when doing those pricing experiments, Apple were able to determine the optimal price, $400. But also, in addition to doing the traditional pricing experiments, Apple also tried to discover how might people in fact arrive at a decision to buy this product. And based on that finding, what was the optimal price for the iPhone launch? And finally, Apple management considered more deeply how would a launch price of $600 influence the perception of value for the very first iPhone over a longer period of time. So based on this alternative way of thinking, Apple decided to launch at $600. And by launching the iPhone at $600, Apple were able to make consumers think later that $400 is in fact a bargain. In other words, if Apple had launched at $400, the iPhone, consumers would never have had the possibility to compare prices. And this is especially important in the iPhone case because consumers had never seen a product like that before. As we said earlier, the alternative behavioral economics approach to economic pricing, the iPhone by Apple management, represented a more behavioral view on pricing, which was based on how people make decisions to buy the iPhone. And unlike the neoclassical economic thinking, by taking a behavioral approach to the problem of pricing the iPhone, Apple were able to consider the role of buyer habit, trust, and other consumer choice behaviors. The word behavior is important for you to understand in this context because it is the foundation of the principle of behavioral economics. And the word behavior reminds us that there's something going on in the mind of the consumer, and this something had been neglected in neoclassical economic thinking. And to emphasize the importance of behavior, recent developments in brain imaging technology have in fact now allowed managers to enter the minds of consumers. And as an example of the benefits of being able to do this, Professor Jonathan Cohen, a leading psychologist at Princeton University in the United States, has done numerous brain imaging studies of people. And what Professor Cohen's research has shown is that more often than not, human decision-making involves brain mechanisms that are associated with emotional responses rather than only rational analysis. And what this means is that emotions play a very important role in consumer decision-making. And as managers, we need to understand more about what this means for our individual businesses. But unfortunately, despite the findings of Professor Cohen and other researchers, and although most economists are willing to accept these findings, which state that human decisions are often reached emotionally rather than rationally, despite that, the vast majority of economists still continue to believe and preach the neoclassical message, which says that all firms and individuals make a rational calculation as to what is in their own best interests. Despite this popular belief, though, Professor Cohen's work is of great interest to the emerging field of behavioral economics and the subfields of behavioral finance, etc. And his findings are of interest because researchers in those fields are studying the effects of psychological, social, cognitive, and emotional factors on the economic decisions made by individuals and institutions. Behavioral economists are also studying the consequences of those decisions for markets, prices, returns, and resource allocation. So there's a lot of interesting research occurring at the moment in this field. But now you're probably wondering, what exactly is behavioral economics? Well, unlike neoclassical economics, behavioral economics is primarily concerned with the limits of economic agents, which in economic language means the limits of you and I. In simple English, the term limits of economic agents means that when you and I make decisions, our rationality is limited by the availability of information, for example, or our ability to manage the decision problem we're facing, or the cognitive limitations or knowledge and understanding of our minds, and finally, the time factor, or the time it takes us when we make decisions. So coming back to the 2008 worldwide financial earthquake and Chairman Greenspan's comments about the failure of markets, it's no wonder that behavioral economics is increasingly being discussed as an alternative to neoclassical economics. And you might be interested to know that within the behavioral economics field, there are 3 relevant themes of research now occurring, which have an impact on business. The first of those themes involves the exploration of why people often make decisions based on approximate rules of thumb, or heuristics. The second theme of research is exploring anecdotes and stereotypes that make up mental emotional filters which we use in order to respond and react to events. And anecdotes and stereotypes involve emotional filters we are using, and they're in behavioral economics they call it framing. The third area of research is looking at market inefficiencies, non-rational decision making and pricing, etc., which is very common in the world today. So based on the above discussions, we could say that managers could benefit from taking an experimental approach to decision making, and that experimental approach could use more behavioral theories. And we can say this because behavioral economics experiments get to the bottom of people's decision making and actions. But we should not forget that traditional business experiments can also be beneficial. Unfortunately, though, traditional business experiments are often similar to engineering projects which are built around established governing principles, almost like going down a waterfall. And those established principles are primarily driven by assumptions made about the laws that govern the behavior of different actors, and more importantly, once those assumptions are made, the experiments are carried out solely based on those assumptions. But unlike this engineering approach to experimentation, the behavioral economics approach to experimentation is more like a scientific project. And it's more like a scientific project because the behavioral economists are always searching for the governing principles in decision making and how to implement those principles. And this capability is an important point to remember because behavioral economic experiments have demonstrated how human beings are incapable of making good decisions. They are emotional, they're easily confused, and they're frequently distracted. and these findings can help improve managerial decision making and help reduce the risk in our decision making. According to Professor Dan Early at Duke University, taking a behavioral economics approach to understanding decision making can in fact improve managerial decision making and lower risk. And Professor Early suggests that smart organizations must begin to develop behavioral economic capabilities and practice those capabilities by conducting small experiments. But Professor Early also reminds us that management always involves a mixture of situations, and many of those situations repeat themselves. And those repetitive cases or situations, a manager can use their experience and intuition, and that can be very valuable. But in unknown or more uncertain situations, intuition might not be of value, and in fact it might be dangerous. So part of the appeal of taking a behavioral approach, even if the results don't tell us what to do or tell us what decision to make, those behavioral experiments can prevent us from thinking in the wrong way. Managers should always remember that the ultimate goal is to help make managers like you and I more informed consumers of decision making, which in the end helps us to make better decisions. And now one final thought which you should always remember. Overconfidence in one's judgment or one's odds of success is near the top of the list of most decision-making weaknesses. And it's a trait common to many successful managers. So please always try to remember that good decision-making in the end is based on a dynamic process, and that process can be improved by sometimes following established rules and principles and even experience, even if those rules are based on neoclassical economic thinking. But some decisions, especially those that are unique or uncertain, can benefit from a more behavioral way of thinking, especially in cases where a manager's intuition might be of no value at all, if not dangerous. And this means that part of the appeal of taking a behavioral economics approach to understanding customer behavior is that this alternative approach to decision making, which takes into account behavioral factors, can in fact prevent you as a manager from thinking in the wrong way.